For the most part, the Halo multiplayer games have a really good reputation of not reusing too many assets from campaign parts of the game to fill in the gaps on some multiplayer levels. And while that isn't really necessarily a pet peeve of ours in other games, like Call of Duty is known for doing that quite a bit over the years, I do think it is worth the extra praise when a game goes above and beyond to design some completely unique set pieces for multiplayer. And that's definitely one of the charms that Halo typically has had throughout the years. However, if you're like us and we spend way too much time studying multiplayer maps, taking too close of a look, and just familiarizing ourselves with all of the Halo maps that have released over the years, some maps are a pretty big exception to the standard that we see in Halo, with all the maps being pretty unique. Some are more blatant, and others may be incredibly well hidden and almost secret in a way that it is a part of a Halo campaign. So today we thought it'd be interesting to take a closer look at the Halo multiplayer maps that are in fact ripped right from the campaign, whether you noticed or not. Now obviously, Halo Reach is one of the biggest exceptions to the main formula that we've seen throughout all of Halo, where most set pieces in Halo Reach are in fact pulled right from the campaign. This is just something different that they tried with Halo Reach. I mean, the multiplayer maps were fine, but they gave us the fresh Forge world to build whatever, so we'll give them a little pass on this one. Actually, we found it more interesting to look at the multiplayer maps that are definitely way more subtle about reusing assets from the campaign in one way or another. We felt like Halo 3 is really when they started to kind of bend the design philosophy a little bit and started kind of expanding on campaign ideas in the multiplayer, though we do see some examples even before Halo 3. But right away, if you look at the campaign level, the Storm, you may occasionally find yourself in familiar territory where this level at various times does very much so resemble other multiplayer maps in one way or another. Most notably, the indoor section when you're going through the warehouse on the Storm was very much the setting used for the multiplayer map Foundry, though the wall architecture, interestingly enough, is not identical like what we initially thought when we were working on this video. We thought it was just a straight up copy and paste from the campaign into the multiplayer map and Forge canvas that we know today, but actually the rooms are different in their own ways if you look at them side by side, which is kind of unique. Now, some of you may be looking at this and like, yeah, what's the big deal? Why is this a video? I know I ask myself that all the time, but we do think it's interesting nonetheless because this isn't something that typically Halo has done in the past. Alternatively, if you go later on in the same level of the Storm to where the big AA gun is, you kind of walk past some barricades and you enter into this area that is this open field that you must navigate and make your way up to the tower to take out the gun. Now, a lot of this area is kind of just blown to smithereens in one way or another, and the area could be a whole lot bigger if there wasn't these giant gaping cliffs just dropping to the sides where you'll die if you fall off. And there definitely is a pretty heavy resemblance from this section to the multiplayer map Standoff, which still has this kind of opening area where you can visualize the landscape being quite a bit similar, but also it doesn't have those drop-offs just around everywhere and you have more room to navigate, though just the dimensions and the way this area feels very much seems to be taken right out of the Storm with, you know, out the giant crevasses, and then they put all these cool little satellites in the background and underground bunkers, which are neat too. I don't know, surely I'm not the only one who sees a link here. Citadel is another great example. This is a really popular multiplayer map just because of the fact that it's super symmetrical, it's close quarters arena, and just people really liked it. However, I remember the day this map came out, I was like, hey, this is like the towers from the Covenant, just the bottom floor. Now obviously, the map is not one-for-one replicated, but the setting, the space, and just the design philosophy very much borrowed from that campaign level. This one's probably one of the more obvious ones. Also, similarly, if we're trying to look at locations that likely take place in areas that share similar proximity, perhaps, to where other areas from the campaign take place on, something could be said about Construct, where it seems like this might be one of the lower levels below the section that you actually play on the Ark. and it shares the same skybox and same overall setting when you're playing in campaign versus playing on multiplayer. So this one's worth noting too, even though the structures are still quite a bit different. Actually, if we want to backpedal a little bit more to an older Halo game, we look at Halo 2 at the multiplayer map Turf. Now, Turf obviously takes place in old Mombasa, just from the aesthetic that's going on here, though they did a really good job at making this feel like a unique area, unlike the experience you'd have when you play on the multiplayer level outskirts. However, I can't help but to notice when you get to this bend right here, just the way the road's set up, the way that the dimensions and proportions are based on where you're standing to where the building's standing, it really does feel like this is that corner right by the front of Hotel Zanzibar, and just Hotel Zanzibar is not there. Maybe I'm just imagining things, but I don't know, I just feel it. District is a little less subtle than maybe Turf was, where this whole section right here is kind of taken right out of the first firefight area, and even though you can't go to the area you would normally spawn on the beginning of Outskirts on, this whole area is almost one for one the same as the campaign version, and it was made by the team that worked on Halo 2 Vista, and it wasn't really a launch game, so it is a little bit of a different story. Gemini is super interesting just because this specific multiplayer level shares the same skybox and setting that the campaign level High Charity uses, though this structure itself is not actually featured in the campaign. So it is interesting here because it's settled in an area that would obviously canonically be a part of the same type of area that Master Chief travels to in the Halo 2 campaign, but it's not, so it's maybe just this other room that's very similar looking, but not quite the same location as where the campaign takes place. Okay, then if we move on to Halo Combat Evolved, the earliest Halo game, there's not too many examples that really tie into this the same way that, say, Halo 2 and 3 kind of passively did some stuff. Timberland really comes close to an example we maybe could use here, even though it only released on the PC version of Halo Combat Evolved, but it could be argued that this area is inspired by the holdout points from the second campaign level Halo. This one might be a little bit more of a stretch, but the level Death Island, on the other hand, very much so seems to be a direct pull from the campaign level The Silent Cartographer, though the actual insides are kind of taken out and replaced with a more generic canyon. But then again, this map technically is a map that only is in the PC version of Combat Evolved. It wasn't in the original until, you know, like MCC. Okay, but then I decided that before we can really conclude or go anywhere with this type of information, there were two levels that have a bit more of a conspiracy theory around them, but they're ones I firmly have to talk about because they're kind of the basis of the video, even if other people can't see them. I pitched these ones to Luke, and he kind of was like, I don't see it. I don't know what you're talking about. So you guys are just gonna have to trust me on this one, because as crazy as it sounds, I can't help but to firmly believe that there is some sort of connection going on, and I may be the only person in the world who somehow visualizes this one. But on the level The Storm, right away when you enter the door and you kind of have this little area you go up on the side, you open up the bigger door that opens the hallways for all the Marines to move up. This whole little section, very, very much so, may have been taken and then evolved in the form of a multiplayer map. And that multiplayer map I feel so strongly about is Orbital. I know it doesn't visually look at all the same, but for whatever reason, whenever I play on Orbital, I'm constantly thinking about that opening area on the Storm. There's just something about the way that the map is set up, the way that there's these upper levels, even if the staircases aren't facing the right way, that just makes me confidently think that at some point, maybe they pulled this level to work on a map, and then they decided it would look cool in a space type of setting, and they overhauled it and changed every last bit of it, but maybe somewhere at one point there were some bones and structure in there based off of the Storm building and layout, and then it was drastically changed later. Well, no one else can see this but me. I had to bring it up just because I feel so confidently about it. Also, this multiplayer map does come back in Halo 3 ODST's final campaign epilogue, just like the whole cutscene with Johnson actually just takes place right here in Orbital, which is kind of cool. Okay, then there's another one that's a little bit out there, a little more on the conspiracy side of things, but the multiplayer map Longshore, which is one of my favorite Halo 3 maps just aesthetically speaking. While I know obviously there's no location that matches up with this location in the campaign, I often wonder if when they were designing this multiplayer map, maybe they decided to use the cutscene room or design that is used in the final epilogue cutscene, where we have the Arbiter and Admiral Hood talking, and they repurposed that and made this nice little Mombasa Quays area that turned into Longshore. I don't know why, I just feel like the color pattern and direction feels very much from this campaign, and there's no evidence to prove it other than the colors here, but for whatever reason my brain just automatically thinks that these two are related somehow. And then there's obviously Halo 3's Rat's Nest, which doesn't really try to hide the fact that aesthetically takes elements from Halo 3's campaign mission Crow's Nest, though it is interesting. It seems like it's almost a different base or a sister base nearby rather than just being a straight pull from the campaign, as it has these roads that wrap around and these inward sections, and it's really cool to see actually. It's really interesting though to see how we may have seen some maps from the Halo 3 era from campaign levels directly, where other game franchises like Call of Duty would just blatantly do it. And by the time Halo Reach did come around, it was commonplace in games like Call of Duty that Reach was able to just reutilize locations, and it still was cool, but there definitely was a charm about how Halo had this reputation of making original maps, and how they really had to kind of cover up some things to make it look less like it's reused areas from the campaign by the time they did start to do it in the Halo 3 era. Interestingly enough, when 343 took over, one of the big things they did talk about early on, specifically with Halo 4, was that they wanted to build multiplayer maps that were completely separated from the campaign. So there aren't too many more examples beyond the original Bungie games that we can talk about from that 343 era, and the only one we can actually closely see as being an example of this would maybe be in Halo 5 Guardians with the multiplayer map Mercy, which utilizes a lot of the design from part of the Halo 5 campaign and puts it over the map layout of Haven from Halo 4, kind of combining this really popular map from Halo 4 with the art aesthetic from a very popular campaign mission from Halo 5, and it is a really cool looking map, even if they kind of reuse the decorative assets from the campaign. Honestly, we don't really have any big complaints when this stuff is done. It's actually really intriguing to see how these maps that are pulled from campaign levels throughout Halo get redesigned and reincorporated into a multiplayer format, or how some of the assets and stuff like that can be reutilized in a really unique way. It's something incredibly impressive from a design standpoint, and while we of course are always interested in seeing brand new locations every time, every once in a while having a cool set piece from the campaign isn't really a bad thing either. But what do you guys think about maps that reuse assets like this? Let us know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. Also, if you guys get a free chance, take a look at our Patreon. We are now updating the way our Patreon system works. As some of you may know, Halo's been kind of slow right now, and if you guys want to support our channel, there are two of us working on making every single one of these videos. It'd be really cool if you guys want to go above and beyond. We're updating our perks and kind of how they work a bit and the type of engagement we're going to have for our Patreon supporters. So if you want to help us out, that'd be awesome. But otherwise, our videos are always free to just watch anyways. So thanks guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys all next time with a brand new video.